everybody, I'm Rhinocio, and it's really dark today. See, this is the thing, I don't know if it happens in other hemispheres, other parts of the world, but it gets dark really early here, really fast in the winter. I'm sorry about the bad lighting to that effect, because it's like 4:30 and my house is pitch dark because the sun's set and it's all cloudy and you can't see anything. I'm working with what I got. So as much as I love the fact that we have changing seasons here, we get a winter, we get a distinct summer, you get the leaves falling, you get the heat, you get the cold, you get the snow. I personally get really bummed out as soon as it starts getting really dark in like the winter-ish time. We're coming up to the winter solstice in the next like month and a half or so, which means already the days are getting extremely short. Usually by like 6 o'clock right now, the sun is gone. It starts setting at like somewhere between 4:30 and 5:30, depending on the day.
Headlights on, patio lights on, darkness happening.
I do find that it's very important in these dark times to find things that make the days better, things that like bring up your mood, things that make you feel good. And as we all know, I am big gay. So I'm part of a Discord group that ships Duck and Minerva from the Adventure Zone Amnesty, among 8,000 other things. We're honestly all poly shippers. It's fine. But somebody had the great idea to encourage more Minerva content because she's kind of a secondary character, doesn't quite get as much love as some of the other ones in the show. Originally, this was something we were going to do in May, I think it was, which was like Minerva's Earth Day, like when she came to the planet in the story. But that didn't pan out because, pandemic. But we're getting later in the year and everyone's kind of chilling out a little bit. Things have calmed relatively. The 17th of this month, we had all planned, or are planning, to put in a bunch of art related to this Minerva character. And so I had that on my mind. But as you all know, I've also been really into She-Ra lately, so like that was also on my mind. And then one day, I had a thought. I was like, so hey, She-Ra, big buff lady character with trauma, who's an alien. And then like, TAZ Amnesty, big buff lady character with trauma, who's an alien. And so I was kind of like, what if I just... And so this happened. Sometimes you're like, I am a big gay. And the world is like, you sure are, bro. And then you're like, I can draw. So you draw a thing. That is my entire excuse. I have no other excuse for this. Sometimes you just be self-indulgent. Anyway, I thought it would be kind of interesting to have these two characters interact. And also I just like drawing big buff ladies fighting each other because muscles and like swords and big buff ladies. So here we are! So although I knew generally what I wanted to do with this drawing, I didn't have a super clear idea of the pose I wanted. I always find I have a little bit of a struggle with action poses kind of thing. So like I try to start with a line of action, which you can see I redid like 10 million times here, but I tend to end up changing the pose a lot, which you can especially see with Adora. I ended up changing her leg position so many times. My initial sketch layer was basically just skeletons fighting, because I just needed a general idea of where their bodies were gonna be. When I moved on to the second sketch layer, that's when I started bringing in a little bit of color, just so I could tell the two characters apart. And you know how sometimes you like go to draw and things just work out? That's what happened here. These character faces, like Adora's face is an extremely difficult angle, and it just worked. And Minerva looked exactly like she needed to be. I think it's the power of queer. You draw something really self-indulgent and really gay, and it just works out. The biggest problem that I had with Adora's pose is that I'd already drawn her upper body and her face, and it had turned out so well that I didn't know what to do with the lower body. I didn't really want to change the upper, So the lower body went through a lot of different configurations, and I'm not totally happy with the one I ended up with. The idea with the final pose was that Minerva had swept She-Ra's leg out from under her, which is why it's a little bit off the ground. I like Minerva's pose too much to want to change that very much either. Sometimes you get yourself in a pickle and you just gotta work with it. I admit that having these two characters interact is really out there, because She-Ra sort of takes place on a fantasy world in a fantasy setting with magic and space travel and stuff, and then Minerva comes from a podcast that's more current day, present Earth, except with cryptids and space aliens. So a little bit of a weird mashup, but also not implausible, because like there is space travel involved and you don't know where they're from. Anyway, this is extremely self-indulgent, but I'm having fun with it. Minerva and Adora's base character attributes are very similar. They have in some ways similar backstories. They're both characters that had far too much responsibility thrust on their shoulders at a young age. They've had a lot of shit happen. They're apparently the last of their kind, or very close to, maybe. They didn't get too deep into that with Adora, but point is, I thought it would be really interesting to see these characters interact, and like, not just in a fighting sense, but also I feel like Minerva would be a really interesting role model or somebody to talk to for this character. Just play in this space with me, alright? Just roll with this for a hot second. Also, they just both have really interesting, cool swords. So, Adora's got like a magical space sword, but Minerva's is specifically based off a Zweihander, I think I'm saying that right, which is a extremely long sword, which I think is actually meant for like if you're on top of a horse, but supposedly she just flings this thing around. And I've seen some really interesting theories that different historians have on how these swords were used in close combat. Some people even theorize that they were used more like a bow staff, so kind of flung around and used in more bludgeoning ways than slicing ways. Anyway, it's a really cool weapon. Definitely would recommend looking into it. But I thought the contrast was kind of fun with these characters too, because the smaller character has the big, wide, magical sword, and then the big buffer character has like a long, thin sword. It's an interesting comparison. As far as the coloring goes, I mostly picked off screenshots from She-Ra to try to get her color palette right, but Minerva I kind of just made things up because she's a podcast character and doesn't have any canonical look. I have drawn a lot of her though in the past like year and a half, so I've gotten down a pretty set mental image of what I picture her as. Although that being said, her design changes all the time. I thought She-Ra would look more like She-Ra if I stayed with the white and gold sort of outfit that she has, but Minerva I kind of just picture as like not really caring too much about what she wears and just borrowing clothes from the people in the town she's in, so I wanted to give her some like 80s looking workout shorts and just like a loose tank top. I put some sparks in between their swords clashing because, like, why wouldn't you? And that was just a lot of, like, oranges and reds and yellows, and then some were on a luminosity layer and some weren't. And speaking of luminosity layers, I had the highlights for the background, the sort of sun rays coming through. I had them on the drawing pretty early on, except I realized that they were just kind of covering up the characters and not really highlighting what they needed to. It didn't look like sunbeams, it just looked like a weird filter on the drawing. So I ended up erasing them and redoing them a couple times. And I do find with these Lumi layers, sometimes it's easier to put it on a normal setting first so you can figure out, like, really draw out in this bold purple where everything is. And then you can switch it to Lumi and see how intense you want it to be and alter it from there. After that, it was just kind of a few cleanup things, stuff I forgot to color in the background, and little tweaks here and there. And my very self-indulgent gay fantasy sword fight was done. Anyway, as per usual, thank you guys for watching this. If you liked it, please let me know with a like or comment or something to that effect, because it's very helpful, and it lets me know, like, what stuff I should make, and, like, gets the videos more out there. Anyway, it's very helpful. I appreciate it. And if you'd like to hang out and see more of this kind of stuff in the future, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye! My legs are going to sleep. I'm sure am I short now? I went to the glitter beam. Oh, it's cold. What is this? What? Darkness encompassing me, all that I see. Absolute nothing I cannot do. I cannot try. Look at myself. What am I holding? That's cold as hell.